The ballroom sparkled under 1,000 chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the grand space. A soft murmur of conversation and clinking glasses filled the air, blending with the gentle strains of a classical quartet. Richard Lawson, a prominent businessman known for his vast fortune and philanthropic endeavors, moved gracefully through the crowd, his tailored suit a perfect reflection of his polished demeanor. Tonight was one of his charity galas, an event he hosted annually to raise funds for the city's underprivileged. As he exchanged pleasantries with influential guests, his eyes wandered to the far corner of the room where a quieter scene unfolded. There, near the edge of the dance floor, stood Clara, her presence almost invisible among the glitz and glamour. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her shoes scuffed and worn, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Richard had been alerted to her presence by a gentle tap on his shoulder from his assistant. "Mr. Lawson, there's someone here you should meet," the assistant said, guiding him towards Clara. Her eyes were downcast, and she seemed to be struggling to find her place amidst the grandeur of the event. As Richard approached, he noticed the weariness etched into her face, the faint lines that spoke of sleepless nights and long battles. He extended a warm smile and introduced himself. Clara looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and hesitation. "I'm Clara," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the background noise. Richard's gaze lingered on her, sensing a story behind those tired eyes. "Clara, it's a pleasure to meet you. How are you enjoying the event?" he asked, his tone genuinely curious. I'm not sure," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect to be here. I just wanted to see what it's like, to maybe get a glimpse of something better." The sincerity in her words struck a chord with Richard. He had encountered many people in need, but Clara's vulnerability and quiet hope seemed to call for something more. Without hesitation, he offered her a reassuring smile. "Why don't you tell me more about your story?" They moved to a quieter area of the ballroom, away from the clamor of the event. Clara hesitated for a moment before she spoke, sharing fragments of her life, of struggles and dreams deferred. Richard listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. Clara had fallen on hard times, and the weight of her circumstances was evident in her voice. Richard's mind raced as he absorbed her story. Here was someone in need of a hand up, and he knew he had the means to help. "Clara, I'd like to offer you something more than just tonight's respite. How about we discuss how I can assist you in finding a more stable place to stay and explore other ways to support you?" Clara's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope breaking through her weariness. "You do that for me? Why?" Richard smiled warmly, his gaze steady. "Because everyone deserves a chance, and sometimes a little help can make a world of difference." The moment was charged with a sense of new possibilities. As the gala continued around them, Richard and Clara's conversation marked the beginning of an unexpected journey. Clara felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in a long time, and Richard, moved by her resilience, realized he had made a connection that went beyond charity. With a promise to meet again soon and discuss further steps, Richard saw Clara to the exit, where a new chapter of her life seemed to begin. As Clara stepped into the cool night air, her heart felt lighter, the weight of her struggles momentarily lifted by the kindness of a stranger. And so, with a simple act of compassion, Richard and Clara's paths intertwined, setting the stage for a revelation neither could have anticipated. The city awoke to a gray morning, clouds hanging low like a heavy curtain. Inside his spacious office, Richard Lawson sat behind a sleek mahogany desk, his mind occupied with thoughts of Clara from the previous night. The gala had been a whirlwind, but Clara's story lingered in his thoughts, an enigma he felt compelled to unravel. Richard's assistant, Laura, knocked softly before entering with a stack of files. "Mr. Lawson, here are the reports you requested," she said, placing the documents carefully on his desk. "Is there anything else you need this morning?" Richard's gaze remained fixed on a photograph tucked within one of the files, a snapshot from a charity event years ago, depicting a young woman he didn't immediately recognize. He ran his fingers over the image, a sense of déjà vu washing over him. "Laura, can you pull up the records from last night's event? Particularly, any information on Clara?" Laura nodded, her curiosity piqued by the unusual request. "Of course, I'll get that for you right away." As Richard waited, his thoughts drifted back to Clara. Her tired eyes and the way she spoke about her past haunted him. There was something about her story that felt unsettlingly familiar. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, trying to piece together the fragments of his recollection. Laura returned with a digital tablet, displaying a file labeled Clara, Event Details. Richard's eyes narrowed as he scanned through the information. There were records of her attending the event as a guest, but no detailed background. Just as he was about to close the file, he noticed a small note attached, a brief mention of her past involvement with a charity connected to a significant event in Richard's own history. The connection struck him like a lightning bolt. He recalled a tragic incident from his past, a fire at a local shelter that had claimed lives and left many families devastated. The woman in the photograph, who had been an advocate for the victims, was Clara's mother. The realization was staggering. Clara was linked to a chapter of his past he had tried to forget. Richard's heart raced as he delved deeper into the records, his mind piecing together the fragments of a long-buried memory. The more he learned, the more he understood the gravity of the connection. Clara was not just a random guest at his gala. She was part of a story that had deeply impacted his life. Determined to confront this revelation, Richard arranged to meet Clara at the same cafe where they had first discussed her situation. The cafe was a cozy retreat from the city's chaos, its warm lighting and comfortable chairs offering a stark contrast to the cold reality Richard was grappling with. Clara arrived, her face brightening at the sight of Richard. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation." Richard's smile was strained as he motioned for her to sit. "Clara, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's important." As Clara took her seat, Richard placed the photograph and the relevant documents on the table. "I discovered something about your past, about your mother and the fire that happened years ago. It seems your story is intertwined with something from my own history." Clara's eyes widened in shock as she glanced at the documents. How do you know about that?" Richard's voice softened. "I was involved in the aftermath of that fire. It was a turning point for me, and I didn't realize until now that your family was affected by it." Clara's gaze fell to the table, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. "I never imagined." Richard reached across the table, his tone earnest. "I'm sorry for the pain that was caused. I want to understand more about your connection to that event. It's important to me." As Clara looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the gravity of their shared history began to sink in. Richard's realization had opened a door to a past they both needed to confront. The warmth of the cafe seemed to envelop them, providing a brief respite from the storm of revelations that lay ahead. The connection between their lives had been revealed, and as Clara and Richard faced the truth of their intertwined past, it became clear that their journey together was only beginning. The next steps would uncover more about the impact of the past on their present lives and the path they would choose moving forward. The days that followed were marked by a subtle tension in the air. Richard found himself caught between his usual routine and a growing curiosity about Clara's past. He spent hours poring over old news articles and charity reports, searching for any link that might shed more light on their shared history. In contrast, Clara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She busied herself with the small apartment Richard had arranged for her, determined to create a stable environment for herself. Yet, the weight of the revelation gnawed at her thoughts, leaving her restless and apprehensive. One crisp autumn morning, Richard invited Clara to join him for a walk in a park near his office, a place he often visited for reflection. The park was a picturesque haven, with golden leaves fluttering in the breeze and the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the crisp air. They strolled along a winding path, the atmosphere soothing yet charged with the unspoken tension of their recent discoveries. As they walked, Clara's gaze drifted over the vibrant colors of the changing leaves, her mind wandering to memories she had tried to bury. Richard, sensing her distraction, broke the silence. "Clara, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation and what it means for both of us." Clara glanced at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "What do you mean?" "I've been looking into the details surrounding your mother's involvement in the aftermath of the fire," Richard said, his voice steady. "There are connections that go beyond just what we've talked about." Clara's curiosity piqued, and she turned to face him. "What kind of connections?" Richard took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "It seems that your mother was involved in a charity that was founded shortly after the fire. This charity had close ties to my family's foundation, and I was deeply involved in its establishment. It's possible that our paths crossed long before we met." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "You're saying our families have been connected for years?" Richard nodded. "It's a possibility I'm trying to piece together. I believe there may be more to uncover about how our families' destinies have intertwined." They continued walking, each step resonating with the weight of the revelations. Richard's mind raced with the implications, while Clara grappled with the idea that her past was intricately linked to a world she had only glimpsed from the fringes. As they reached a small bench overlooking a tranquil pond, Richard sat down, motioning for Clara to join him. The reflection of the trees danced on the water's surface, creating a serene backdrop for their conversation. "Clara," Richard said, his voice gentle, "I want to understand more about your mother's work and her involvement with the charity. It might help us make sense of this connection." Clara nodded slowly, her thoughts turning to her mother's tireless efforts and the impact she had on those around her. "My mother was dedicated to helping others, even in the face of her own struggles. She worked tirelessly to support those affected by the fire, and I remember her talking about the foundation that was set up." Richard's eyes softened with empathy. "Your mother's commitment was remarkable. I remember how deeply involved my family was in supporting that cause. It's almost as if our lives were destined to intersect." The realization settled between them, a bridge connecting their separate histories. Clara felt a flicker of hope amid the confusion, while Richard's determination to uncover the full story grew stronger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, Clara and Richard knew they had only scratched the surface of their shared history. The path ahead was fraught with unanswered questions, but the bond they had begun to form held the promise of unraveling the mysteries that had linked their lives. With the shadows lengthening and the park growing quieter, they stood up from the bench, their resolve firm. They would continue their quest for answers, driven by the belief that understanding their past would pave the way for a better future. As they walked back to the park entrance, the evening air seemed to carry a sense of possibility. Their journey together was just beginning, and the hidden connections between their lives were waiting to be fully revealed. The following week brought an unexpected storm to the city, its torrential rains and howling winds mirroring the turmoil within Clara and Richard. The skies were overcast, and the constant drumming of rain against the windows created a somber soundtrack to their introspective thoughts. In Richard's office, the usual hum of activity was replaced by an air of intense focus. He was surrounded by stacks of documents, old newspaper clippings, and photographs, each piece meticulously spread out across his desk. He had spent days digging into the past, trying to untangle the web connecting their lives. Clara, too, was grappling with her own uncertainties. Richard had invited her to join him at his office to discuss their findings, and though she was eager to understand more, a gnawing doubt tugged at her. What if delving into their shared past only uncovered more pain than answers? As Clara arrived at the office, she was greeted by the sight of Richard immersed in his research. The room was lit by the soft glow of desk lamps, casting long shadows over the cluttered desk. Richard looked up, his face a mask of determination and weariness. "Clara, I'm glad you're here. We have some new information to go through." Clara nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've discovered so far. It's overwhelming." Richard's expression softened. "I understand. This is a lot to process, but I believe we're getting closer to uncovering the full picture." He handed Clara a file containing recent documents he had gathered. These are records from the charity your mother was involved with. They include correspondence and financial statements that might shed light on the connection between our families. Clara opened the file, her eyes scanning the pages. The documents revealed a detailed account of the charity's work and the substantial contributions made by Richard's family foundation. It was clear that her mother had been a significant part of the charity's efforts, but there were gaps and discrepancies in the records that left questions unanswered. "Richard, some of these documents don't add up," Clara said, her voice tinged with frustration. "There are entries that don't match what I remember. It's almost as if there's something missing." Richard studied the documents, his brow furrowed in thought. "I noticed that too. It's as if there are pieces of the puzzle that haven't been revealed yet. We need to dig deeper to understand why there are inconsistencies." The room was silent except for the sound of the rain pattering against the windows. Clara looked out at the storm, the tumultuous weather reflecting her inner conflict. "Do you ever wonder if we're better off leaving the past where it is?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "What if uncovering these connections only brings more pain?" Richard paused, considering her words. "I've thought about that, but I believe that understanding our past is crucial. It's not just about resolving old wounds. It's about finding closure and perhaps even discovering how we can move forward." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Laura, Richard's assistant, entered with a solemn expression. "Mr. Lawson, there's a visitor here who insists on speaking with you. She says it's urgent." Richard exchanged a concerned glance with Clara. "Let's see who it is," he said, standing up. They followed Laura to the reception area, where a woman in her late 50s stood with a determined expression. Her face was familiar to Clara, but she couldn't immediately place her. The woman's eyes locked onto Clara with a mix of recognition and apprehension. "Hello, Clara," the woman said, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm Margaret Turner. I believe we have some unfinished business." Clara's heart raced as she tried to recall where she had seen Margaret before. "I remember your name from my mother's records. What's this about?" Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and resolve. "I was a close friend of your mother's. I've been following your story, and there are things I need to tell you. Things that might explain some of the gaps in the records." Richard and Clara exchanged a look of curiosity and concern. As Margaret began to speak, her revelations promised to bring new insights into the tangled web of their shared past. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, as if echoing the tumultuous revelations about to unfold. With a new layer of mystery about to be unveiled, Clara and Richard braced themselves for the answers and the doubts that lay ahead. The storm had finally abated, leaving behind a city washed clean but still dripping with the aftermath of relentless rain. The skies were clearing, revealing a fragile patch of blue amidst the gray clouds. The weather mirrored the tumultuous emotions inside Clara and Richard as they welcomed Margaret Turner into the conference room at Richard's office. Margaret took a seat across from them, her hands trembling slightly as she organized her thoughts. Clara and Richard settled in, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and concern. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning, and the rain's lingering patter against the window seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. "Margaret, thank you for coming," Richard began, his tone respectful but firm. "We're eager to understand what you have to share." Margaret nodded, her eyes shifting to Clara. "Clara, I knew your mother well. We worked closely together on many of the charity projects. There are things I've kept hidden for years, things I believe are crucial for you to know." Clara leaned forward, her gaze fixed intently on Margaret. "What is it? Please, just tell us." Margaret took a deep breath, her voice steadying as she began. "Your mother was instrumental in the charity's early days, but there was a hidden aspect of her involvement. She had knowledge of some very sensitive information related to the fire, information that implicated several influential people, including members of Richard's family." Clara's eyes widened in shock. "Are you saying my mother knew something that could have exposed powerful individuals?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, the charity wasn't just a means of aid. It was also a cover for addressing issues that could have caused significant scandal. Your mother tried to protect the victims, but she also knew that revealing certain truths could have endangered her and those she loved. Richard's brow furrowed as he processed this new revelation. So, my family was involved in a cover-up? Margaret met his gaze, her expression pained. Not directly, but there were connections. The fire was a devastating event, and the aftermath was complicated. Your family, along with others, was involved in managing the fallout, which included keeping certain facts out of the public eye. Clara looked at Richard, her mind racing. If this is true, then our connection goes beyond mere coincidence. It's as if our lives have been intertwined by events we barely understand. Richard's face was a mixture of disbelief and concern. Margaret, why are you coming forward now? What's changed? Margaret's eyes were filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. I've been carrying this burden for too long. I can't stand by and watch as the truth remains hidden. You both deserve to know what really happened. As the weight of Margaret's words settled in the room, Clara felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, and betrayal swirled within her, mingling with a newfound sense of clarity. Richard, too, grappled with the implications of the truth and the impact it had on his own understanding of his family's past. The room was silent for a moment, each person lost in their thoughts. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice resolute. We need to take this information seriously. If what Margaret says is true, it's not just about our families, but also about the broader impact on those who were affected by the fire. Clara nodded, her eyes meeting Richard's with a determined look. I agree. We need to investigate further and uncover the full extent of the truth. Margaret looked relieved but still anxious. I'm willing to help in any way I can. There are records and documents that could provide more clarity. I just hope that by revealing this, we can find some form of justice. As Margaret left the office, Clara and Richard were left alone, the enormity of the situation weighing heavily on their shoulders. The air was charged with the realization that their quest for answers had taken a significant turn. The sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the cityscape, as if offering a glimmer of hope amidst the revelations. Clara and Richard knew that the path ahead was fraught with challenges, but their resolve to uncover the truth was stronger than ever. The impact of the truth had set them on a new course, one that would reveal even more about their intertwined destinies and the secrets they had yet to uncover. The days following Margaret's revelation were marked by a whirlwind of activity and emotional upheaval. The once bright and clear skies had grown cloudy again, as if echoing the tumultuous state of Clara and Richard's minds. Each day was consumed by meetings, research, and the relentless pursuit of truth, with every step forward bringing new challenges and decisions. Clara and Richard had decided to meet in a quiet cafe not far from Richard's office, a place where they could talk away from the chaos of their daily lives. The cafe's warm interior offered a brief respite from the cold, harsh weather outside. Soft jazz played in the background, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. As Clara walked in, she noticed Richard already seated at a corner table, his expression serious and thoughtful. He greeted her with a nod and a half-hearted smile as she took a seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me," Clara said, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and determination. "I've been thinking a lot about what we've uncovered. It's overwhelming." Richard sighed, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "I feel the same. Margaret's revelations have shifted everything we thought we knew. We need to decide how to move forward, but it's not an easy decision." Clara took a sip of her coffee, letting its warmth soothe her nerves. "What do you think we should do next?" Richard's eyes met hers with a hint of resolve. "We need to dig deeper into the records Margaret mentioned. If there's more information that can shed light on the connections between our families and the charity, we need to find it. But we also need to be cautious about how we approach this. The more we uncover, the more risks we face." Clara nodded, her mind racing with the implications of Richard's words. "What about the potential fallout? If we expose the truth, it could have significant consequences for everyone involved, including us." Richard leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Yes, there's a risk of backlash, but staying silent isn't an option either. We owe it to ourselves and to those affected by the fire to find out what really happened. The cafe's bell chimed as the door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Clara looked up to see a familiar face enter, Margaret, who had come to join them with a determined look on her face. She made her way to their table, her presence adding a new layer of gravity to the conversation. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Margaret said, taking a seat beside Clara. "I wanted to discuss our next steps and offer more help if needed." Richard gestured for Margaret to join the conversation. "We were just talking about the challenges we face and the decisions we need to make. What additional information do you have?" Margaret took a deep breath, her expression earnest. "I've been reviewing the documents I have, and there's something specific that might help. There are correspondence records between the charity and some influential figures, including those involved in the management of the fire's aftermath. These records could provide insights into the decisions made and the cover-ups that took place." Clara's eyes widened with hope. "That sounds like exactly what we need. Where can we find these documents?" Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table. "These are copies of the relevant correspondence. I've also included notes that might help you understand the context of the information." Richard took the folder and began flipping through the documents. The weight of their significance was apparent in the furrow of his brow. "Thank you, Margaret. This is incredibly valuable. We'll need to analyze these thoroughly." As Margaret prepared to leave, she looked at Clara and Richard with a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Be careful. The truth has a way of stirring up old ghosts, and there are people who won't be pleased with what you uncover." Clara and Richard exchanged a resolute look. They knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with difficulties, but their commitment to uncovering the truth was unwavering. With the folder in hand and the weight of their decisions pressing heavily on their shoulders, Clara and Richard left the cafe and headed back to Richard's office. The cold air outside was invigorating, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cafe but symbolic of the clarity they sought. As they entered the office, the hum of the city beyond seemed to fade, leaving only the focused intensity of their work. They knew that each step they took was a step toward unraveling the tangled threads of their past and confronting the hidden challenges that lay ahead. The truth was within reach, and the choices they made now would shape not only their futures but also the legacy of those who had been affected by the fire. The weeks following the discovery of the correspondence were a blur of activity. Clara and Richard, fueled by their determination to uncover the truth, spent countless hours poring over the documents. Each piece of information they uncovered seemed to bring them closer to the heart of the mystery, but it also made their path increasingly treacherous. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside Richard's office, Clara and Richard gathered around a cluttered desk strewn with documents, coffee cups, and notes. The atmosphere was tense but focused, the weight of their investigation heavy in the air. "I think we're finally making progress," Clara said, her voice tinged with fatigue but also excitement. "This correspondence sheds light on some key figures who were involved in the aftermath of the fire." Richard nodded, his eyes scanning a particularly damning letter. "Yes, but it also complicates things. Some of the names here are people we thought were allies, but it looks like they might have had more to gain from the cover-up than from the truth." Just then, the office door creaked open, and a familiar face stepped in, Jonathan Blake, a trusted lawyer and longtime family friend of Richard's. His presence was unexpected, and his expression was serious. "Jonathan, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. Jonathan closed the door behind him and took a seat. "I've been following your progress from a distance and felt it was time we had a frank discussion." Clara looked between Richard and Jonathan, sensing the gravity of the situation. "What's going on?" Jonathan took a deep breath, his demeanor earnest. "I've come to warn you. The investigation you're conducting has not gone unnoticed. There are powerful people who have a vested interest in keeping these secrets buried, and they won't hesitate to protect their own." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying that we're in danger?" Jonathan's gaze was steady. "It's not just about physical danger. There are also political and financial pressures that could be brought to bear against you. I've seen this happen before, and it's rarely pretty. Richard leaned forward, his expression grim. What should we do? Jonathan hesitated before speaking. You might need to consider making some alliances. There are people who could be persuaded to support your cause, but it's crucial to be careful. Trust is a luxury you might not be able to afford. Clara's mind raced as she considered Jonathan's words. And who should we approach? Jonathan looked thoughtful. There's a journalist named Emily Carson who's known for her investigative work on corruption. If you can get her interested in your case, she could help bring the truth to light. But be cautious. The wrong move could jeopardize everything. With Jonathan's advice in mind, Clara and Richard decided to meet Emily Carson. They arranged to meet her at a small, dimly lit bar known for its discreet atmosphere. As they arrived, Clara felt a mix of hope and apprehension. The stakes were high, and every decision felt like it could tip the balance. Emily arrived punctually, her sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Clara and Richard. She took a seat, and after brief introductions, they dove straight into the heart of their investigation. We've uncovered evidence of a major cover-up involving some influential figures, Richard explained, sliding a folder across the table. We need someone with your expertise to help us expose the truth. Emily's eyes widened as she examined the documents. This is serious, she said, her tone a mix of interest and concern. If what you're saying is true, this could be explosive. But it's also dangerous. Clara nodded, her expression resolute. We're prepared to take the risks. We just need your help to ensure that the truth gets out. Emily looked thoughtful for a moment before nodding. I'll look into this further. But remember, once we start this, there's no turning back. We'll be facing powerful interests, and there's no guarantee of safety. As Emily left the bar, Clara and Richard felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had managed to form an alliance that could aid their cause, but the path ahead was fraught with potential betrayals. Later that night, as Clara and Richard walked back to Richard's office, the streets were eerily quiet, the weight of their decisions palpable. They knew that each step forward would bring them closer to the truth, but also deeper into the web of deception and danger that had ensnared them. Their resolve was stronger than ever, but they were also keenly aware that alliances could shift and betrayals could come from the most unexpected sources. The truth was within reach, but it came with a cost they were only beginning to understand. The night was thick with tension as Clara and Richard sat in Richard's dimly lit office, the silence only interrupted by the occasional rustle of papers and the hum of the city outside. The intensity of their investigation had reached a critical point, with each new piece of information adding weight to the mystery that had engulfed them. Clara glanced at the clock, midnight. She was exhausted, but the urgency of their situation kept her alert. We need to make sense of these documents, Richard. Emily's report should be here any minute now. Richard nodded, his eyes fixed on the papers scattered across the desk. I know, but the longer we wait, the more anxious I get. What if something goes wrong? Just as Richard's words hung in the air, a knock at the door broke the silence. Clara's heart skipped a beat. It was Emily Carson, and from the look on her face as she entered, the weight of what she was about to reveal was immense. Sorry I'm late, Emily said, her voice tight with a mix of anxiety and determination. I've been working through the night, and I have something significant to share. Clara and Richard exchanged a hopeful glance as Emily sat down and opened a folder. I found something, Emily began, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. There's a pattern in the documents that links the fire to a high-profile financial scandal involving some very influential people. Richard's eyes widened. You're saying the fire was more than just an accident? Emily nodded. Yes, it seems like the fire was orchestrated to cover up financial misdeeds. The connections are subtle but undeniable. The timing of the fire, the financial transactions, everything points to a deliberate attempt to erase evidence. Clara's mind raced. So, the fire was a part of a larger scheme? Who's behind this? Emily sighed, flipping through the documents. It's hard to say for certain, but there are indications that a powerful corporate entity might be involved. Names like Jonathan Blake's are mentioned, which could explain his warning. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Jonathan? But he's been helping us. Emily's gaze was somber. It's possible he was trying to protect himself or distract you from discovering the full truth. There's a chance he's part of the larger scheme. The revelation hit like a tidal wave, leaving Clara and Richard reeling. The realization that someone they had trusted might be involved in the deception added a new layer of complexity to their quest for justice. "We need to confront Jonathan," Richard said, his voice firm with resolve. "If he's involved, we need to get to the bottom of this." Clara nodded in agreement, though her heart pounded with apprehension. "Let's do it. We need to know where he stands." As they prepared to leave, Clara's phone buzzed with a new message. She glanced at it, her eyes widening in shock. It was a cryptic message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face the consequences." The message added a chilling note to their already precarious situation. Clara and Richard exchanged a grim look, knowing that their investigation had hit a nerve. They headed to Jonathan's office, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The building was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of machinery. As they reached Jonathan's door, Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. Richard knocked firmly, and after a brief pause, Jonathan's voice called from inside. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Jonathan looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "What brings you here at this hour?" Richard stepped forward, his tone direct. "We need to talk about what Emily uncovered. It seems there are connections between the fire and some serious financial crimes. Your name has come up." Jonathan's eyes widened momentarily before he composed himself. "I see. And what exactly do you want to know?" Clara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Are you involved in this? If so, we need to know the truth." Jonathan's face hardened. "You're treading dangerous waters. The people you're dealing with have resources and power beyond your understanding. If you continue down this path, you may not like what you find." Richard's voice was unyielding. "We're not backing down. The truth needs to come out, no matter the risks." Jonathan looked between them, his expression a mixture of resignation and defiance. "I can't help you if you're intent on pursuing this. But know this, there are forces at play that are far greater than you realize. And if you keep digging, you'll soon find yourselves caught in a storm you're not prepared for." With those words hanging in the air, Jonathan turned away, leaving Clara and Richard standing in the dimly lit office, the weight of his warning pressing heavily upon them. As they left the building, the chill of the night seemed to seep into their bones, mirroring the uncertainty and fear that now accompanied their quest. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the realization that their pursuit of the truth had made them targets in a dangerous game. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but Clara and Richard were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The turning point had set the stage for the final revelations and the ultimate confrontation that awaited them. The dawn was breaking, casting a faint golden hue over the city as Clara and Richard stood outside the towering headquarters of the corporation implicated in their investigation. The once innocuous building now loomed over them like a fortress, its sleek, modern facade concealing the dark secrets within. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission pressing heavily upon her. "This is it, Richard. Today we confront the heart of the deception." Richard nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We've come too far to back down now. Let's get inside and get some answers." As they entered the building, the atmosphere was starkly different from the quiet of the streets. The lobby was pristine, with marble floors and glass walls reflecting the morning light. It was as if the corporation's polished exterior was designed to hide the darkness that lay beneath. They approached the receptionist, a young woman with a practiced, impersonal smile. "We're here to see Mr. Thomas Bennett," Clara said, her voice steady. "We have an important matter to discuss." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly as she made a quick call. Moments later, they were directed to an elevator and escorted to the top floor, where the executive offices were located. The elevator doors opened, revealing a sleek corridor lined with heavy wooden doors. They were led to a large office at the end of the hall. As the door opened, they were greeted by Thomas Bennett, the CEO of the corporation. His demeanor was calm, almost too calm, as if he had been expecting them. "Mr. Bennett," Richard began, "we have some serious concerns regarding your company's involvement in the fire and the financial scandal. We have evidence that links your organization to these events." Bennett's eyes flickered with a mixture of amusement and irritation. "I see. And what exactly do you plan to do with this evidence?" Clara stepped forward, her voice firm. "We intend to bring the truth to light. The public deserves to know what really happened." Bennett's expression hardened. "You're making a grave mistake. This company has powerful connections. Exposing us will not only put you in danger, but will also ruin your lives." Richard's eyes narrowed. "We're prepared to face the consequences. The truth is more important than our safety." Bennett's gaze was unyielding. "Very well. If you're determined to proceed, then you should be prepared for the fallout. But remember, you're not the only ones who have something to lose." As the conversation unfolded, the tension in the room was palpable. Clara and Richard could sense that they were on the verge of a critical revelation or a dangerous confrontation. Suddenly, Bennett's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before his face turned even more grave. "It seems you're not the only ones with a vested interest in this matter," he said, his tone shifting. "There's someone who wants to ensure you don't leave this building with your evidence." Clara and Richard exchanged alarmed glances. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice tight with worry. Bennett's expression was grim. "I mean that your investigation has attracted unwanted attention. There are individuals who will stop at nothing to keep these secrets buried." Before they could react, the office door burst open, and a group of security personnel stormed in. The situation escalated rapidly as Bennett's calm facade crumbled, revealing a man desperate to protect his empire. "We need to get out of here," Richard shouted, grabbing Clara's arm. They made a frantic dash for the elevator, but the hallway was already swarming with more security. In the chaos, Clara and Richard found themselves cornered. The stakes had never been higher, and their every move was fraught with danger. As they fought their way through the building, it became clear that their pursuit of the truth had put them in direct conflict with powerful adversaries. Desperation drove them to make a dramatic decision. Clara pulled out the evidence they had gathered and handed it to Richard. "Get this out of here. I'll create a diversion." Richard's eyes were wide with fear and determination. "No, Clara, we need to stick together." Clara shook her head. "It's the only way. Just make sure this gets to the right people." With a last, lingering look, Clara turned and headed back into the fray, creating a diversion by causing a commotion and drawing the security personnel away from Richard's path. Her actions bought Richard enough time to escape with the evidence and make his way to a safe location. The confrontation was intense, and Clara's bravery in the face of overwhelming odds was a testament to her commitment to the truth. As Richard made his way to safety, he couldn't shake the worry for Clara, who was now left to face the consequences of their actions alone. The turning point had shifted from confrontation to sacrifice, and both Clara and Richard knew that their fight was far from over. The path to justice was fraught with danger, but they were more determined than ever to see their quest through to the end. The early morning sun filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Richard's apartment, casting long shadows across the room. Richard sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents that had once been a beacon of hope, but now represented a crossroads in their journey. The evidence Clara had risked everything for was finally in safe hands, but the fight was far from over. As he flipped through the papers, the weight of their sacrifices pressed heavily on him. The room was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of paper and the distant hum of city life outside. Every word, every piece of evidence spoke of corruption and deceit on a massive scale, and the enormity of the task ahead was daunting. The sound of the doorbell jolted Richard from his thoughts. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and made his way to the entrance. When he opened the door, he was greeted by Emily Carson, her face drawn but resolute. "Richard," she said, stepping inside. "I've been trying to reach you. I have news." Richard led her to the kitchen table, where they both took seats. "What's happened?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting the strain of recent events. The evidence you've collected has made a huge impact. It's already being reviewed by major news outlets, and there's a growing public outcry for accountability. A flicker of hope crossed Richard's face. That's good news. But what about Clara? Emily's expression grew somber. Clara's been taken into custody. She's facing serious charges related to the chaos at Bennett's building. The room seemed to shrink as Richard's heart sank. We have to help her. We need to clear her name. Emily nodded. I'm working on that. We have a team of lawyers and advocates who are rallying to her cause. But it's going to be a long and difficult fight. Richard's thoughts raced. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Clara's bravery had to be honored, and her sacrifice could not be in vain. I want to do everything I can to support her, Richard said firmly. Let's make sure the truth comes out and that Clara gets the justice she deserves. Emily smiled, her eyes showing gratitude and resolve. We will. We're in this together. Later that day, the media coverage intensified, with headlines splashed across news websites and TV screens. The story of the corporation's corruption and the dramatic revelations about the fire were captivating the public's attention. The narrative was shifting, and with it, the momentum for change. Richard and Emily worked tirelessly to ensure that the evidence was presented clearly and effectively. Press conferences, interviews, and public statements were made, painting a vivid picture of the corruption that had plagued the company. The truth was out, and the pressure on the corporation mounted. Weeks passed, and as the investigation continued, the wheels of justice began to turn. The corporation faced increasing scrutiny, and the legal battles intensified. Clara's legal team worked diligently, presenting the case that her actions were driven by a commitment to uncover the truth, not by any malicious intent. The courtroom became a battleground, with Clara's bravery and Richard's dedication shining through. As the trial unfolded, the public's support for Clara grew, and the narrative shifted from one of scandal to one of resilience and integrity. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Clara stood in the courtroom, her face set with determination, as the judge delivered the final judgment. The court acknowledged her sacrifices and the pivotal role she played in exposing the truth. Clara was acquitted of the charges, and the court recognized her actions as a courageous stand against corruption. The relief and joy in the room were palpable as Clara and Richard shared a moment of quiet celebration. The story of their journey had not only exposed deep-seated corruption but had also redefined their futures. The fight for justice had forged new alliances and strengthened their resolve. Clara's courage and Richard's unwavering support had led to a significant victory, and the impact of their efforts would be felt for years to come. As the sun set over the city, Richard and Clara stood together, looking out at the horizon. The challenges they had faced had been immense, but they had emerged stronger and more united. The future was uncertain, but their commitment to justice and truth had paved the way for new possibilities. With a shared sense of accomplishment and hope, they walked forward, ready to embrace the new chapter that lay ahead. The journey had been arduous, but it had forged a bond that would endure, and together, they were ready to face whatever came next. Click on the video being recommended to you now.